Welcome to Rock and Roll High School, your choice for in-depth and personal conversations with the most legendary artists in the history of contemporary music. Come with us as we explore the albums and songs that have become the soundtrack of our lives. Here's your host, Pete Ganbarg.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Rock and Roll High School. My guest this week is the principal lyricist and founding member of the English rock band Spandau Ballet, Gary Kemp. Spandau Ballet were key members of the New Romantic movement in the late 1970s in London, rising out of the famous Blitz Club as part of a group of like-minded musicians, creatives, and future fashion icons, altogether known as the Blitz Kids. Alongside his brother Martin on bass, sax player Steve Norman, drummer John Keeble, and lead singer Tony Hadley, Spandau Ballet had hits all over the world with songs like Gold, Through the Barricades, Only When You Leave, and the iconic ballad True. The band also performed at 1985's legendary Live Aid concert and on the Do They Know It's Christmas charity record, both organized by their friend, Boomtown Rats frontman Bob Geldof. Gary's also an actor, with notable parts in the 1990s gangster film The Krays, and alongside Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner in 1992's The Bodyguard, as well as roles in the theater on London's West End. Gary's podcast Rockonteurs with Guy Pratt has recorded over 250 conversations with their friends and fellow musicians like Pete Townshend, David Gilmour, Mark Knopfler, Elvis Costello, and Johnny Marr. Gary and Guy also play together in the band Saucerful Of Secrets with original Pink Floyd drummer Nick Mason. Gary's latest solo album, This Destination, is out now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock and Roll High School. My guest, zooming in today from the UK, Gary Kemp. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Pete.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, actually.
Good. Excellent. So you and I have something in common. We both have podcasts.
And nobody without a podcast, right? You're nobody.
You get a podcast and you get a podcast. Yours is absolutely great. It's called Rockonteurs with your friend and fellow bandmate, Guy Pratt. But we were just talking before we went live that we've had some of the same guests on. And so I'm usually interviewing musicians or songwriters who do not have their own podcast. So forgive me if I'm not at the level that you're used to, but we will try our best over here.
I think what makes our podcast slightly different, obviously, is that we're musicians and a lot of people we have on know of us in the first place. And Guy played with Pink Floyd and he plays with Gilmour, and obviously Nick Mason played on Madonna records, Michael Jackson records, bass player, fantastic. And it's kind of like a AAA pass thing, three musicians chatting backstage.
Yeah, it's awesome. And for those of you who have not listened to Rockonteurs, the podcast with Gary and Guy, there are 250 shows so far with guests ranging from David Gilmour and Pete Townshend and Mick Fleetwood, but it goes deeper, Elvis Costello, Fatboy Slim, Jimmy Webb, who was on our podcast, Mark Knopfler, Johnny Marr, Trevor Horn, Paul Stanley, John Bon Jovi, Alice Cooper, Brian Johnson. It goes on and on and on and on. And it's fantastic because it's like eavesdropping, like you said, backstage with musicians who are also friends. I was listening to the David Gilmour episode yesterday, and he doesn't do podcasts. The only reason he did a podcast with you guys is because you're friends.
Yeah. You just made me think when you were going through that list, because I'm a fanboy on all of those. And that's what makes the podcast work, because we are fanboys. But I grew up as a kid buying the music press and reading about some of those giants. But it did occur to me just then, that generation of the sort of Townsends and the Gilmours, etc., their heroes were either poor black guys from America playing the blues, or they're gone. They're not around. They've long gone. Or they didn't even exist in their own country. So they didn't have the ability to meet their heroes in the same way that we do in this generation now.
It's really interesting when you speak to musicians of a certain generation, the same names keep coming up, especially artists that I'll speak to who were born in the UK. Hank Marvin's name comes up in every episode, and I'd be shocked if anyone who you would stop randomly on the street in America would even know who Hank Marvin was.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, Hank and the Shadows, they were basically ended up as Cliff Richard's backing band, a name that probably American kids don't know either.
Right, which is crazy.
At the beginning of rock and roll in the UK began, and here we go with the education part of the show.
Professor Kemp, you're on.
Began in Soho, London, about 1957, when the Two Eyes Club, that's literally written at the number 2 and I, Two Eyes Club was a coffee bar, really, when coffee bars were becoming hip. It's a small little place on a tiny street in Soho. Outside is a big white guy, massive bouncer. He is going to go on to become the manager of Led Zeppelin. This is Peter Grant. As you walk in, he's there as the security guard. And anyway, you go downstairs, and the beginning of British rock and roll started there, influenced by Elvis Presley, influenced by the kind of records that a guy called Tommy Steele was finding as he toured as a sailor across America and American ports and bringing them back to the UK. And a band called The Shadows. And this guy, this guitarist called Hank Marvin, who's a Buddy Holly fan. He's wearing Buddy Holly glasses. He's playing a red Stratocaster, just like Buddy Holly. By the way, that's the first red Stratocaster, or Stratocaster at all, to come into the UK, bought by his lead singer, Cliff Richard. And everybody, and he had a sound, Hank, he had a sound that really turned on a generation of guitar players like David Gilmour. And even if you listen to David today, you can hear the melodies and the styles played on his own Strat that are inspired directly by Hank.
It's crazy, the lack of degrees of separation. We had Peter Noon on this show, and he was talking about his relationship with Peter Grant. And things that you would not necessarily think went together. It's crazy.
Yeah. I love these dots that you can draw between very few people in very small areas. And the thing about England, and this is going to go to the heart of maybe part of my interview and of the backstory of Spandau Ballet, part of what makes English music special is it was always about youth culture and pop culture coming together, but in a place, always around a venue.
Right.
The venue became the heart of a change.
Right.
And those changes were made because very rapidly the next generation, and some of those next generation means only a few years younger, wanted to do something different. Right. Or maybe they were just going in a different direction. So I'm going to give you a quick précis. Out of the Two Eyes Club, after that, you can jump to 63, 62, 63, and you've got the Rolling Stones at the Railway Tavern, and you've got the Who at Eel Pie, and you've got up in Liverpool, obviously, famously, you've got the Beatles at the Cavern.
Right.
That's beat music. And then you've got, in 67, you've got the UFO Club, UFO Club, down in Tottenham Court Road in London, West End. And it's an Irish pub. And it's basically, this gets taken over one night a week, and the Pink Floyd play there, and Psychedelia is born.
Wow.
The door is called Joe Boyd, who also have happened to mix the sound at the Newport Festival that Dylan Goes Electric at. Right?
Just saw that movie. What a great movie.
I know. So I'm just giving you a quick blast through the sound. The next club comes in about 2 years after that, and it's called Middle Earth. That's run, I've forgotten the guy's name, but basically out of it came T-Rex and David Bowie in the beginning of glam rock.
Wow.
And that's in Covent Garden. You might then say Punk, the Roxy Club in London.
Right.
Again in Covent Garden.
Right.
You then come to my generation.
Which is the Blitz.
And it's the Blitz.
Right.
And the Blitz Club, again in Covent Garden, it's not a club. Like, it's not like Danceteria. Right?
For those who remember Danceteria.
This is a wine bar.
Right.
That it designed like the Blitz means 1941 England, right? When Germans were dropping bombs. Designed in that style. It's a crappy wine bar that on a Tuesday night it's his worst night, that these two young kids, Steve Strange and Rusty Egan, approached the owners and said, can we take over your club on a Tuesday? We're going to make it Bowie night. These were kids of my generation, obsessed with that early period of Bowie, that Bowie had really taken them on this incredible journey of education in music as he developed through all of his different images.
Yeah.
And inside, we played music that Bowie had validated, but mostly music out of Germany like Kraftwerk.
Right.
And we became the house band, Spandau Ballet. So the new romantic movement, or new wave, as you guys call it over there, was born.
So it's a continuation of quote unquote, because it means something different now, but quote unquote club culture, starting with the Two Eyes and eventually finding its way via Steve and Rusty at the Blitz. And it wasn't just about the music, as you said, it was about the fashion and the visual and all these things coming together. And then I would go one step further. If you come to America, maybe a year or two after your New Romantics are at the Blitz, we have CBGB here in New York with the Talking Heads and the Ramones. We have, you go a few years later to LA and you have the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Rainbow and the Sunset Strip.
Or Danceteria with Africa Bambaataa playing, Rocket, which has got a bit of Kraftwerk on it and a bit of heavy metal on it,
Right. I mean, it's interesting that Africa Bambaataa samples, it's not samples, replay at that point, Kraftwerk. So all these things are kind of coming full circle. But, we're recording this. Congratulations as well to you, Gary, on the release of your new album. It's your third solo album, just released recently and doing great. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, This Destination is called. And yeah, it's, I've got to remain creative. That's what I do. That's playing and making music. As I see myself primarily as a songwriter. And, I wrote all the songs with Spandau Ballet. And I think as a solo artist, you can get to write songs that are much more about you personally.
Right. How would you feel if the heavens opened up and all past wounds were healed and it's time to make a new studio album with the guys, with Spandau Ballet? Would you bring a different creative approach to an album like that versus This Destination album?
Yeah, I think I would. There are a couple of tracks on this album that are you could probably take straight away and into the Spandau Ballet setup and have Tony sing it. But I think I would lyrically write differently. I think I would have Tony in my mind when I'm writing the melodies. I would have Steve Norman and his sax playing in my mind. There's a voice in the band. You also have the history of the band in your mind.
For those that don't know, Spandau Ballet is a very unique band in that I can only think of two other bands, and I haven't, spent a ton of time thinking about this, so I'm probably not accurate. But when the principal songwriter of the band, in your case, 100% songwriter, words, lyrics, melody, all coming from you, the principal songwriter is not the lead vocalist of the band. So Spandau Ballet with you and Tony is one example. Obviously, the most famous example that comes to my mind immediately is The Who with your friend Pete Townshend writing for Roger Daltrey, who doesn't write. Depeche Mode is an example with Martin Gore writing the songs for Dave to sing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
I can't really think of anybody else at that level. There are three bands, and your band's one of them.
Yeah, I think it's really because Tony didn't write. We didn't write together as a team. There are, so many of those singer-songwriter teams, aren't there? Jagger Richards, or, I just mentioned, Duffy Asprey, or although there wasn't Mae Mercury, was there? They all wrote separately, those guys.
Right.
But yeah, pretty much all of them. I think the history of singers wasn't about being writers.
Actually, I thought of a couple of more.
Go on.
The Zombies. Colin didn't write.
The Zombies, of course. That was Rod Argent.
Rod Argent, and also from America, Boston, Brad Delp, the great singer, did not write. But there are not a lot of examples. And I think, what's fascinating to me, talking to you today, is when you are the 100% songwriter writing songs for your singer, Tony Hadley, to sing, that's got to create tension over the years when the value of the underlying compositions of the copyrights come into fore, and you as the songwriter are going to have a different income stream or an added income stream that the musicians and the performers in the band are going to have.
It didn't matter for The Who because they were like making most of their money, like a lot of bands, making most of their money live on the road, right? So that didn't matter.
Right.
And I think, and during the 80s, it didn't matter for us either because we were a live unit.
Right.
But it's an interesting point. And, the trouble between Spandau as individuals and where that financial thing is concerned came after the band had finished or had split up or had taken this eternal hiatus. And then obviously there was no income stream on the playing live side of things.
Right.
Would we have still been together if I'd pulled Tony aside one day and say, come on, Tony, let you write the lyrics, I'll write the music? Maybe. But then all the chemistry of the band was what it was, and it made sense at the time, and it was successful at the time. The history of singers, Tony's favorite singer was Frank Sinatra. Frank didn't write.
Right.
Elvis didn't write. This idea that a singer has to be a songwriter as well is kind of came out of Dylan.
I just thought of going back to one degree of separation. Whitney Houston did not write, and you starred with Whitney Houston in her 1992 movie, The Bodyguard.
I know. Why didn't I write for her? I remember doing the movie, and Kevin Costner in rehearsals said, in front of Whitney, he was saying like, "Oh, True is the song that belongs to me and my wife. That's our tune."
So why couldn't he make sure it got on the soundtrack then, speaking of mechanical royalties?
Exactly. But anyway.
So all of the friction and the tension and the rits between band members it's all publicly documented. There's a 2014 documentary called Soul Boys of the Western World. And if you watch it, I think that there's a difference in how we as Americans perceive the band Spandau Ballet, and as English people who grew up with the music in the same country that the band was in perceive the band. Because I was thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the band as a band, I think, was much bigger there than here. But the song, True, was much bigger here than there, right? I mean, it was a hit there, but it's a standard here.
No, I think you're right in those points. We were successful before that song "True" came along. Where in America, "True" was our entry point into the charts there and public awareness. And we'd come out of a cult era, youth cult, the whole new romantic thing of the way we were dressed. And obviously there was another band in Birmingham doing the same thing in a club called the Rum Runner, and that was Duran Duran. There was another band up in Sheffield doing the same thing. That was Human League and ABC, of course.
Right.
We made an electronic first album that was very much a sort of electronic dance album, very sort of British, very European sounding. Tony was very influenced by Bowie. And then we a second album that was a bit sort of psychologically confused. It was tended towards funk with a song called Chart Number One.
I don't need this pressure on. 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 I don't need this pressure on.
And then I personally fell in love with the idea of being a songwriter. So where before I was creating records that were for clubs and had groove associated with them, I then went and spent some time up in Scotland with a friend of mine in a band called Altered Images, a woman called Claire Grogan and her friends in the band. They were playing a lot of Marvin Gaye and Al Green and old sort of 60s, 70s soul, which is music I also loved in the 70s as a kid. And I just thought, that is songwriting. And I would love to be able to shock everyone and just write one of those tunes.
And you did.
and I started writing True album, and I wrote it at home. Call my brother in every few minutes as another song came up.
Your brother Martin, your band member, yes.
We made this album in Nassau at Compass Point. Our third album, we were making it in. I remember the studio time really clearly. That we were a bunch of working class guys from North London, and we arrived at the studio, went straight out to the pool, put on our Speedos, our tiny little budgie smugglers, as they call them over here, and started making loads of noise, jumping in and out of the pool. And of course, there were these very arty New York types sitting on the other side of the pool, not exposing their white flesh to the sun, and that was Talking Heads. And, and I think the culture shock at that point, there was no culture war, but we could see the difference. I think I slightly aspired to be on their side. I was more of the I think I would have preferred to have been wearing the black polo neck at the side of the pool.
Right.
But we were both making records in that studio at the same time, and a lot of that atmosphere of that place, the Island Studio, literally owned by Island Records on an island,
right,
infiltrated that album, and it was a big album over here and worldwide for us.
Yeah, no, for sure.
What you're talking about is that we then went on and carried on having successful albums with Parade through the Barricades in Europe mostly, and certainly in the UK, but across Europe. And I remember sitting down once years later and talking to John Taylor from Duran, and he goes, the thing is, we had America, but you had Europe. Right. So we sort of had the world together.
Right. Right. I mean, getting back to recording the True album, you had switched producers between album 2 and album 3 from my friend Richard James Burgess, who was your producer on the first 2 albums, to Swain and Jolly on the True album. And Tony Swain has been quoted as saying that in making the True album in the Bahamas, there was a sense of place and a sense of location that actually made it onto the album. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, we had a little video camera with us, me and Tony had one each. I remember they'd just come out, these video cameras, and we were shooting stuff. And I remember immediately putting some of the stuff music on top of it while I was there. Some of the music we'll make, backing tracks we were making in the studio, putting the music on top of video shots of the beach and of locals and of palm trees. And it worked immediately. We were making the sort of soundtrack of the place we were in.
Right.
Saying that, I already had the song, that kind of what probably you're not allowed to call anymore Blue-Eyed Soul, but that's what we were doing.
Right.
Was, I love people like Robert Palmer and Hall & Oates,
yes.
and what Bowie had done in Blue-Eyed Soul with Young Americans, with Luther Vandross as well. And I suppose, that's what we were trying to capture, is why we went there, but it definitely helped being there to make that record.
It's interesting that you mentioned that True, when you're writing it, post the influence of your friends in Altered Images, kind of expanding your horizons musically, you've said that True was inspired by Marvin Gaye, by Al Green, by the Stylistics. There was a big hit record in America in 1981 by Bill Withers and Grover Washington Jr. called Just the Two of Us. Steve, your bandmate,
Building Castles in the Sky.
Oh, what a talent, Bill Withers, right? Steve Norman, your bandmate and sax player, has said that his sax solo on True was inspired by Just the Two of Us by Grover Washington Jr., the great saxophone player. And then I wonder, you mentioned Martin Fry's band ABC. He had a song called When Smokey Sings about Smokey Robinson. And obviously his producer was Trevor Horn, who ended up producing some songs for you later on. But were you guys, because you hear more about the Blitz Club bands, that Boy George was there and Steve Strange, and obviously Spandau Ballet, but was there any interaction between you guys and Martin and ABC and Trevor back then, or would that all come later?
No, I think that's just the zeitgeist. I think that it shows you that, if you look at even what Boy George did with Culture Club, there was a sense of Motown on that as well. Basically, I think we'd all sucked Bowie dry by the end of that first or second album, and we were going back into what else turned us on as kids. And one of the things that we all had Tamla Motown records when we were younger, and Stevie Wonder. And we were hugely eclectic kids over here. As much as you'll hear about the different youth movements and skinheads and punks and teddy boys and new romantics and
Mods
whatever.
and rockers.
Mods and rockers. We all listened to everything. If I went through my record collection, you'd see everything from Marvin Gaye to early Genesis and Yes to AC/DC to Thin Lizzy, obviously Bowie, but it was all there. Fripp, I mean,
Wow.
we were scattergunning.
Right.
All of this became our DNA. Now,
Right.
at the right time, you just suck on the DNA bit that you really think is appropriate.
Yep.
And at that time, there felt like, after being so much kind of very upright, sort of white dance that was very post-punk, coming out of Joy Division and New Order, say, they felt like they needed, from some of us, to write very song-first
Right.
sort of dance music.
Right. And when you're writing song first, you're going back to the great songwriters like
Yeah.
the Marvin Gayes and the Smokey Robinsons and the Al
Yeah, I think
Greens,
so.
for sure. Was Northern Soul a thing yet when you were coming up?
It was, but not in London. So Northern Soul is what it says on the tin. It's the north of England.
Right.
The Wigan is where it's centered around and that never really made it to London. We had our own version of it, which is soul boys who are dancing to soul music, maybe, imports, jazz funk, Grover Washington you mentioned,
Yeah.
or things on the Casablanca label. There was a whole massive scene, very working class scene of young kids who would dress up at weekends or whatever night of week the club was happening and dance themselves sick to that kind of music, and so that there was definitely that scene in the South, but and in the North there was obviously the Northern Soul thing, which was a slightly different kind of music, wasn't it?
Well, it was more obscure music. It was,
Yeah.
There was a race every week to find the song that hadn't been played before. The more obscure, the better. It's fascinating how that went.
Yeah.
But let's go back to your friendship with Claire Grogan from Altered Images for a second, because not only did they open your musical viewpoint to spread the horizons musically a little bit, but your friendship with Claire, which was a platonic friendship, but it really was a special friendship, and I've read that it inspired True.
I'm so aware of this now, Sound, because for years I didn't mention this, and then I suddenly do. And I'm aware of the cringe level, the cringeometer really going up here, and the cheese factor. As a songwriter, you're always looking for ideas and
Inspiration.
I remember, she gave me this book by Nabokov called Lolita, and I read that, and there were a couple of lyrics that really stood out on there. Words, I mean. One was not Seaside Arms. It's something like
Seaside Limbs.
Limbs, and I just went, that goes well in a song. And with a thrill in my head and a pill on my tongue, also there was a kind of a line in the book as well, and I sort of lifted that and rearranged it slightly. I was writing a song basically based on our platonic relationship. Why do I find it hard to write the next line when I want the truth to be said? Isn't that the dilemma of all songwriters? You don't actually want to be that specific about who you're writing about.
Right.
And I wasn't really, listening to Marvin all night long. That's what we were all doing at that time.
Right.
So I think that's as specific as it gets.
It's interesting you mentioned Lolita, because Lolita also inspired a song from around the same era. Sting, Don't Stand So Close to Me. So, Nabokov is a silent co-writer on some of these songs. But
what was the line in that song? It's really
Young Teacher.
So
that book by Nabokov. He went there. He actually name-checked the author of the book.
Someone made it clear to me recently that, and I think that's why it works, and it works with Marvin as well. Never be general, be specific. They said in comedy, the best comedy is if you're going to say, you don't say like he ate a biscuit. You say he ate a custard cream. You name the brand.
Right.
And then it hits home harder.
Right. And I'm sure with Sting's case, it was like, well, who is this Nabokov? And maybe he helped to sell some books. Who knows? But, the song True, we were talking earlier, has become, and I don't use this word lightly because I worship at the altar of the songwriter. It's become a standard. And that word, that's rare air. You know, you don't talk about songs that were written after 1970 as standards, but this song has become a standard. It's become a part of the fabric of music and culture in the U.S. for sure. I mean, not only being used in these key scenes in movies like 16 Candles and The Wedding Singer with Steve Buscemi lovingly singing your song at the end of the film, but also being sampled by PM Dawn in Set Adrift on Memory Bliss, which means that, you know, for somebody who looks at this stuff like me, it's how unusual for basically the same song to go top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, not once, but twice, you know, within a couple of years between what you did on True and what PM Dawn did with Memory Bliss.
Yeah, I mean, it jumped genres a lot, you know, because I think it got played on what in those days in the early 80s, radio was very much sort of color specific.
Right. You guys performed on Soul Train in America.
I think we were like third or fourth band ever to white band to ever
that doesn't happen, you know. So I'd be very curious. The dean of Soul Train knowledge in America is Questlove Amir from The Roots.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't know.
He knows every episode like the back of his hand. I'd be curious what his take was as a teenager watching Soul Train when you guys were on that day.
I'm curious as well. If you get to talk to him, I'd love to hear what he says.
You know, and I'm also curious, maybe that's how Prince B first heard the song on, in America too.
And then the Backstreet Boys took that song, Set Adrift on Memory Bliss, and made it their own and put it on their album.
Right.
And they did a version of that. Ed Norton sang it on Modern Family.
Right. Didn't he say that he was one of the members of Spandau Ballet in between, you know, this one and that one, very Spinal
But he
Tap
did.
act.
That's what was so cool about the writing in America and the research. So he said he's Iggy LaFontaine. And he's not the bass player from Spandau Ballet. He's the one between Richard Miller and Martin Kemp. And Richard Miller was before we were Spandau Ballet, we were a bunch of kids at school doing sort of punk power pop because we'd all seen the Sex Pistols and Generation X and we loved that sound. And he was our bass player then, Richard Miller. And then he left the band. He had nothing to do. He's never become a professional musician. I called him up. I said, "You're on Modern Family, man."
So the writing room went deep with their research that day.
I love that, yeah. But no, I don't know what it is about the song. And it obviously crossed some cultural boundaries right at the beginning. You know, it gets sampled a lot by the rap community and quite a lot of good artists have made it.
When you have a standard, I was thinking the other day, how sad is it that Sinatra never got to record it or Tony Bennett?
He didn't, but one step away from that was Paul Anka. And
I listened to the Paul Anka version, and it's kind of like a watered down version of Sinatra. I mean, the arrangement is nice. It's very suave and jazz. And he makes that slight lyric change. Instead of listening to Marvin, it's listening to Ella. Did he have to get that approved by you?
I guess he did. I mean, not me directly, but my publishing office, he would have got the call. I was friendly with his daughter actually when I was in LA, and I don't know whether maybe it came through her that she ended up playing the record and he heard it.
I honestly think, you know, having gone very, very deep on Sinatra's catalog, that if he had, you know, continued to record a few more years, he would have killed this song.
Oh man, thank you. But I mean, I think it's interesting because it did really work in America. But on the other hand, over here, it's a successful song. But the song that really people remember over here is Gold, which is also on that same True album.
Gold, always believe in your soul. You've got the power to know you're indestructible. Always believing that you are gold. Like that you're bound to return. There's something I could have learned. You're indestructible. Always believing.
Gold has become a song that people sing at football stadiums, soccer stadiums.
And Through the Barricades is also one of your best known songs over there, and it's not well known over here.
I see her in a face that's turned to ice. And when she smiles, she shows the lines of sacrifice. And now I know what they're saying as our sun begins to fade. And we made our love on wasteland and through the back.
No, I don't think it really got released there. We shifted labels. We went from Chrysalis at the end of the Parade album, which came out after True, and we went over to CBS at the time. Ironically, we left Chrysalis because we didn't feel they were doing a good enough job for us selling records in the States. And well, I mean, we were primarily a West Coast band. We grew out of the West Coast with K-Rock and MTV. And I think our music was aspirational and suited the West Coast. You know, that's the kind of sound that they wanted. But it crossed the country in the end. But anyway, we moved to CBS, and that was very good for us in Europe. And Through the Barricades was a huge hit. Through the Barricades, just is for people who don't know, is a song that I wrote in 86, 87. It was directly inspired by a visit that I took to Belfast. It's about two people from either side of the barricades in Belfast, although it's not specific. It could be anywhere that has that kind of division, like America.
When you talk about the barricades, you're talking about Protestant and Catholic, right?
I am, yeah. And a friend of ours who'd worked on the Spandau Ballet True Tour, who was in the merchandise department, whose brother played in Stiff Little Fingers, he was the drummer. And I went with him to see his grave. He was killed in the Troubles. And as I walked along the Falls Road, which was the Catholic side, and I could see the barricades between all the side streets that divided one Protestant side from the Catholic side. And it was really shocking to see that at that time when we first went to Belfast, which is part of the UK, there were tanks on the street. You know, there were lookout posts. We stayed in a hotel there called the Europa Hotel. It was the most bombed hotel in Europe in the early 80s. So I eventually wrote this song about that, and it really worked. And then we went to Berlin a few years after that as the wall was coming down and played it in Berlin. And again, it worked. It was about that, you know, and I think it's that, you know, as America knows right now, you know, there's cultural divisions everywhere.
Right.
It seems to have kept relevant all these years.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous song. And, you know, with a tragic, you know, Romeo and Juliet-esque style lyric, but people in America need to know that song more than they do.
It suited where we were playing at that time because we'd moved into being an arena band.
Right.
And I think that's the other thing as a songwriter, you tend to write for the space you're performing in. So on those first two albums that Spandau made in 80, 81, 81.
More club, right?
Club. And so you're writing songs for club because that's where you're playing. And then you move into the proscenium arch theaters and you're writing songs like True and Only When You Leave. And then we become an arena band and we're writing the big rock ballads, if you like Through the Barricades.
Right. Well, you're playing in some of the biggest venues in the world, and we're recording this interview in February of 2025. It's the 40th anniversary year of when Spandau Ballet appeared at Live Aid. And you have a friendship with Bob Geldof. Do you want to talk about Do They Know It's Christmas and Live Aid and Bob Geldof and all that stuff?
So I've been friendly with Bob Wright for years because Bob actually turned up. Bob was in the Boomtown Rats, turns up at the Blitz Club. He's got a beautiful young wife, a girlfriend called Paulie Yates, who's very hip, and she's a journalist on TV. And he gets in the Blitz, he hangs out. He's there the day Bowie arrives, actually, and this is in 1979. He's there when we play our first gig on the stage at the Blitz at Spandau Ballet, and he becomes a friend. And sometime in 84, I'm in the King's Road in London and I'm looking in the window of an antique shop. And he sees me, he walks by in the street and he sees me through the window. Kemp! And he comes inside and he always calls me Kemp. And he's just said, did you see the Michael Burke report on the news last night about Ethiopia? And I hadn't. And I said, why? And he said, look, you know, this is what's happening. And do you think we could make a record if everyone got together? And at that point, you know, he's not having any hits, right? So the Boomtown Rats have kind of finished, but we're having hits globally. And so are all the bands in England at that time. He sees the potential in that. I say to him, you know, yeah, why not? You know, but I'm off on tour in Japan. Let me know. I didn't actually think anyone would do it because I thought we were so competitive. You know, we were so bitchy towards each other, Culture Club and us and Duran. Anyway, I get to Japan. The phone goes, it's Geldof. It's on. You're going to do it. This is the date. I said, right, okay, we're going to be doing a TV show the night before in Germany. We fly Japan, Germany. We're going to be doing a TV show, funnily enough, with Duran Duran. First time we've ever been in the same room together. And then we of course, so then Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran decide to stay up all night drinking. We get 2 private planes. We fly back to London and we arrive at this studio owned by Trevor Horn, Psalm West. And the day begins, and it's all there on film now. There's a documentary that the BBC just put together of all the footage that day.
And there won't be snow in Africa this Christmas time. The greatest gift they'll get this year is life. Oh, where nothing ever grows, no rain or rivers flow. Do they know it's Christmas time at all?
And what really stands out for me when I watch that footage now is this is mostly young working class people, ordinary guys, all in their early to mid 20s, apart from Bob, who's a little bit older. He's 30, I think Midge's 30, all trying to do the impossible, to do this crazy record, to try and feed a country. And I think it's that vitality and naivety of youth that makes us do it. I think we wouldn't have done it if we were a bit older. We would have all been a bit cynical. But unlike the American film of them doing their version, we're not slick at all. What we do have is a lot of talent, right? And it's natural talent. You see that as the kids go out to sing, as Boy George goes out and sings, and as George Michael goes out and sings. And there's that wonderful moment where Paulie Yates is talking to George, and she said, what you been up to? And he goes, I've just made a Christmas single. He said, it's coming out. She said, what's it called? It's called Last Christmas. She said, really? Sing me a bit. And he sings this little bit. Of course, I was in that room. No one knew that song at that time.
That's so funny. Especially for us Americans here, we might not remember that without Do They Know It's Christmas, there's no We Are the World. One inspired the other.
There's no We Are the World. So Geldof then thinks, I'm going to make this happen in America. And he makes his contacts in America. And of course, then that We Are the World happens. Back in England, this is a phenomenon, and it's changing politics because our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, is confronted by Geldof about dropping the tax on the record. So, and she at first digs her heels in, says, I'm not going to drop the tax. And then, of course, she does. This is the beginning of power to the people, right?
Wow.
So there's a sense now that the public have forced the government to change something. And that wasn't really done. You know, post-war Britain, everyone's still doffing their caps to the government. And the Live Aid idea comes about then. And Geldof was getting people into that concert by pretending other people had already said yes.
As you do.
And that was his skill, along with, the very seasoned Harvey Goldsmith, who's the promoter.
Another guest on your Rockonteurs podcast.
And of course, we became part of that wonderful day.
Yeah, fantastic. There is a story about the guitar that you played on True that got stolen shortly after Live Aid, and you didn't reunite with that guitar until fairly recently.
It's hanging behind me.
That's the one? Wow.
That's the one. That's the Strat. I had 2 Strats that I bought in the very early 80s. Both of them are 1979 Stratocasters. Nothing really special, but just, off the peg. And I played that one on stage on the song True, and I then never saw it. It got stolen. It got stolen. It went into storage. I'd favored the white guitar that I was playing, and I never thought about the black one. And then one day I'm looking for it, and it's not there. And it's properly gone, along with a couple of other guitars. But that one is special to me because I played True on stage in Live Aid with it. And about 2 years ago, someone sent me a picture on social media saying, "Is this your guitar?"
Wow!
And the journey it had made up to the north of England to a little tiny shop that had this kind of pseudo museum out the back, and on it, the guy wasn't sure if it was, but he'd been told it was once belonged to Spandau Ballet. And he'd put that as a sticker on it, not for sale. So I get in touch. He basically says that what happened is there was an antique dealers in London, and one day in walks a guy who said, I used to be the roadie with Spandau Ballet, and Gary Kemp couldn't afford to pay me, so he gave me this guitar. And the guy bought it, and then it traveled about, and it sort of got put in storage. Anyway, that's the story of it. And I went up to Lincolnshire in the north of England, met this guy who had it, and was reunited. And it means something. Guitars mean something to us guitar people.
You know what's fascinating is I don't know if you've ever met Randy Bachman, who is a Canadian guitar player and singer who had some massive hits in the 70s with a group called the Guess Who and a group called Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Bachman Turner Overdrive, of course.
And Randy had a similar thing happen to him. He was a guest on my podcast recently, and he had his Gretsch guitar stolen right after all these hits. But it wasn't until COVID that somebody reached out to him. And it's the first time that I've ever heard of somebody whose job is a guitar detective. And they go like watching serial numbers and tracking these things down. They tracked Randy Bachman's Gretsch guitar to Japan and flew him to Japan during COVID, like government planes and things when you couldn't fly. And he was reunited in real time, live on stage with the guitar and the guitarist who had it, you know, for the first time 40 years later. It's crazy.
My story pales into
They actually made a documentary film about that guitar.
I want to know who this guitar detective is, because I've got another couple of guitars.
I'm sure he can help you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think this, you know, Peter Frampton obviously had the same thing, but a slightly different thing. His gear was all in a plane that crashed, wasn't it?
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And the Gibson Custom that he played on Frampton Live, and you know, and that was supposedly gone, and then it turned up in South America.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
and he was reunited.
I do remember this. Yeah, that's
Jimmy
right.
Page as well was reunited with his Stree pickup Les Paul Custom a few years back as well. So they're still out there.
Yeah,
You just,
it's crazy.
and sometimes they've kind of mixed themselves up. They've got someone else's neck.
right. The Frankenstein guitar, right? Back to your new album, This Destination, which is just released. Congratulations. There's a song on the album that, you know, going back to the Blitz Kids era of the late 70s, Windswept Street, 1978, that definitely struck a chord with me, because you're really bringing us back to that time and place. What made you write a song like that now?
I think it's my age, you know. I think London is a very different place to how it was. The whole scene is different. There's no more of those places. You don't have to go and try and stand outside the bar and hope you get chosen to go in to be relevant, or it's all done online. You know, our profiles are our place.
Right.
And I think I'm at that age where I can see more ghosts on the street than I can the people I know, or the people who, you know, I feel that it's something that I was very lucky to be part of. It changed my life, that coming together of like-minded kids that were all ambitious creatively, that wanted to change the next decade, or to drive the next decade.
Right.
And I just wanted to write a song about, one, what it was like to have met those guys and to been on that street at that time. Kids who were gay and straight, kids from leafy suburbs or, you know, tough estates. And then the rest of the song is about me sort of looking for them now, or trying to remember them now.
Don't hold me, don't touch me, don't hold me, you don't touch me. Standing where the past and where the present compete, the merging of the shadows and the hard concrete, where a light once formed around you as we went to meet on a windswept street, on a windswept street.
I read a quote from you where you say, in a sense, now time is a bit of an enemy as you get older, which I thought was very poetic, because, you know, you look around and there are people who were here, you know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, who aren't here anymore.
Well, the thing is with being in this business and being a performer on stage is your youth has a long tail. It's sort of, you can see it coming off the back of you for a long time. and you walk on stage and you're playing songs that you wrote in your 20s. You are feeling the energy of that kid you once were, but in reality, you're approaching retirement. If you had a regular job,
Right.
And I think it works in two different ways. It works in the sense of keeping you young, but at the same time, there's this eternal sense of loss that is always there because you're not really truly moving on from your past. And I think in this business, who would have thought that they would have still been playing? When I wrote True, there was no one maybe the oldest people in the business were 40.
Right.
Just Dylan, maybe, Jagger, maybe. And no one older than that existed in rock and roll. It was still the revolution of the young.
Right.
And now it's become boomer territory.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting. Your friend, Pete Townshend, who we mentioned, one of his most famous lyrics is, "I hope I die before I get old."
Yeah, I think that's obviously not what he wanted to do. He's found a friendship with Roger that's given him access to not just only live out his own youth on stage. And maybe he hasn't died maybe he still is that young man on stage,
Right.
Maybe his youth hasn't died. He's not old. He's still got the anger and the energy, hasn't he? Like, look at Neil Young.
Right. Neil Young put a new song out last week. I just listened to it. It is as good as anything that he's done in a very long time.
He's still angry
vibrant.
as well. He's still angry.
Right.
He's not navel gazing, is he? So, I think there's still a relevance.
Well, talk about young spirits in older bodies. You play in a band with Nick Mason, who is the original drummer from Pink Floyd, and it's called Saucerful of Secrets, the band named after the second Floyd album. And it's you, and it's Nick, and it's Guy Pratt. How fun is that for you?
Oh, man. I mean, it's made a change in my life in many ways because I've become a great buddy with Guy Pratt. We've got this podcast that we've run because of it. But more than that, it's allowed me to be a much more of an upfront guitar player. I get to play a lot more guitar and show off a little, and I get to sing. So I'm fronting the band along with Guy on vocals, and to an audience that would never have gone to see Spandau Ballet.
Right.
So these are guys mostly right now, and I think that's been beneficial. Floyd were one of the bands I loved as a kid. I started with Dark Side. Probably the first Floyd song I ever heard was See Emily Play, and that's Bowie's version on Pinups.
Well, See Emily Play is Syd Barrett, isn't it?
It's Syd Barrett, but it's the part of the Floyd we do.
Right, but Dark Side of the Moon is not Syd Barrett. Right, so you kind of go back to the beginning. Right.
We don't do that. We do the first 5 albums because the whole concept of Nick's band was David's doing everything, but mostly Dark Side on. Roger's doing Dark Side on as well. And those albums need at least 10 musicians on stage. You need backing vocals, you need 2 keyboard players, all of that. We wanted to make this more punk Floyd, right? So, right. So the first 5 albums, let's really explore those. So we go up to Echoes and we do that, and we do the metal album, but we do the fantastic, See Emily Play and Arnold Lane, which have this great beat group feel to them.
Right.
Now, as I said, I was introduced to See Emily Play through Bowie and Pinups. So Mick Ronson's guitar version of the song is one I throw in on stage. So we aren't following exactly the Floyd versions. We're not a tribute act. We're Nick's band, and and we can do what the hell we want with the songs.
And still touring this year?
We haven't got anything announced right now, but I know we are. And we're going to be doing a lot of festivals this year.
Emily tries but misunderstands. She's often inclined to borrow somebody's dreams till tomorrow. There is no other day. Let's try it another way. You'll lose your mind and play free games will make. See Emily play.
What's fascinating about your career is that it just keeps going. You wrote a memoir 15 years ago called I Know This Much. It's almost time for another one because so much has happened in the last 15 years.
I know this much more. It should be.
Part 2, the sequel. So obviously we have to ask, when there are kind of the good and the bad with the band and the lawsuits and the friendships that are more professional than they are personal. I've read a quote that you basically said, people think that you're such great friends, but we're really just workmates, because when we start the band, this guy is the only bloke who played drums. This guy's the only bloke who could sing.
Yeah.
So it's not like you and the other band members, minus your brother, are super, super close friends. So it's more of a work arrangement.
And I think that's the same with every band I know. I think, you're thrown together because of that exact reason. But it's more than workmates, because you're living 24/7 with each other. You are reliant on each other. You're grateful to each other. You've all achieved success because of each other. And you have lived a heightened reality for so long, for whatever, the decade or more, that how could you ever not be indebted?
Right.
So I think that can make you angry at times, but it can also make you grateful.
Well, there's a shared history, and with all history, there are going to be good times and bad times. I read a quote from you that I love recently, where somebody had asked you about the possibility of a Spandau Ballet band reunion, and you wrote, "The door is still open. I mean, it's not like a kind of Johnny Marr Morrissey thing where one person has gone mad."
And I think what one person I'm talking about, right? Johnny is a very good friend of mine.
Right.
No, well, sorry if I'm I don't want to say anything wrong about Morrissey, but I mean, just politically, he's gone very whatever. Even though I absolutely love the Smiths and I loved a lot of Morrissey's solo work, I really do. I would love to see them play again together, but it's tricky. We're so different. But I think with Tony and myself, I think we're at a stage right now where we have no legal differences. We're very cool about each other, and I'd be more than happy to do some Spandau shows. And I think the reason being is because it would just be a buzz to play those songs again in front of an audience whose lives we help to soundtrack.
Well, there's an old expression, time heals all wounds, and hopefully, at a certain point, all the parties will agree to do it again, because every time that you guys break up and get back together, the music's fantastic. I mean, on the album a decade ago that you did, the compilation album, The Story, where you worked 3 new songs produced by Trevor Horn, I was listening to it. They're really good.
And if it wasn't for the fact that we're just older guys, not on top of the wave right now, they all would have been genuine hits if they'd happened in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, there was one song that, "This Is the Love." I mean, I was listening to that and I'm like, that sounds like it could have been a hit any other time.
I know, but it was. I was very proud to do that with him, and it was great to work with Trevor again. And Trevor's, a master in the studio, and
so good.
And yeah, so good. I mean, he made some of the best sounding records in the 80s ever. I mean, you put He Goes Hollywood now, and it could have been made yesterday.
What about Seal?
Seal, unbelievable. Yeah.
It's crazy. We talked about the song from the new album that stood out to me about the Blitz Club, Windswept Street, 1978. You talked about the ghosts that are there on the streets that you used to walk, right? But it's the same thing with doing a podcast where you're talking to people like Marianne Faithfull, who just passed away, like David Crosby, who passed away. On my podcast, I had Lamont Dozier on. I had Sam Moore on. And, I'm so glad I did, because these conversations are now set, for anyone who would ever want to hear these stories directly from the people who told them.
Yeah, I think it's a service. It's the right time. It reminds me of like when I was in Spandau Ballet in the 80s, and you'd see old programs about the Second World War or the First World War, and you think, those vets, we've got to talk to them now before they all go. There's not a single man alive who fought in the First World War. And one day we'll be saying there's not a single person alive who lived and created the golden era of rock and roll, which is what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And we want to get their stories down in from their mouths now. I remember talking to David Crosby a few years ago when the podcast started, and it was during COVID, and he was nearly in tears saying he didn't think he'd be able to get back up on stage anymore. He's going to be 80, and COVID might just be the end of it for
Right.
him. You hear the sadness in his voice because all he lived for was being on stage. We spoke to Mick Fleetwood, who at that time before Christy had died was saying, and got choked up saying, all I want to do is get the 5 original members back on
Right.
stage, because he'd just done this tour with Neil from Crowded House instead of Lindsey Buckingham. And I think, that kind of, you realize how important this is to these guys. They're not just doing it for the money. They want to get back on stage. They want to live those dreams again. They want to meet their younger selves up on a higher plane.
Right. It's who they are. I mean, there's a reason that the Stones are touring, and who would have thought if 30 years ago we were having this conversation and we would say, yeah, the Stones are going to be playing when they're 80.
And I don't want, I was fortunate just before Christmas, I had a lunch and Jagger was there and a bunch of other really important guys. I'm sitting next to Adam Clayton. I said to him, while they're still working, we're still the kids.
Right.
And, I know that seems like a terrible name drop thing to say, but it helps with the anecdote.
Right. And it keeps you young. You're like, well, if Jagger's doing, he's 20 years older than I am. So, I can keep going. As we wrap up, I do want to give another mention to the fantastic podcast that you do, Rockonteurs with Guy. It's fantastic. There's so many great episodes to listen to. So if you're listening to this, but you haven't listened to Rockonteurs, check that out. You also, not only do you make music and play with Guy and Nick and Saucerful of Secrets and the solo album, This Destination, the new one that's so good. But you're also a stage actor. You've acted in multiple plays directed by the auteur Jamie Lloyd. I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, Jamie's become a real superstar in the States now as well. He just did the new Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, I just saw it last week.
It's amazing. He's got his own style and it's really, changing the way people work. There's a really famous playwright here, just for people who don't know, called Harold Pinter, who's dead now, but he was very, very big in the 60s and the 70s, wrote extraordinary, gritty plays. And I have done 3 of those with Jamie. And I love doing it. I worked a bit with my friend John Sim, who's an actor, who's also a musician. And I think we understand it's not that dissimilar to go on stage in a play as it is to get on stage with a band. You have exactly the same nerves, the same energy. With a band, you've broken the 4th wall, of course, and with a play you haven't, but you rely on each other equally to pass the baton at the right time.
Are you going to do more stage work?
Listen, if something comes along that I like, that I want to do, I would do it because I love the thrill of it, and I live in London's West End, so I can walk to work.
There you go, walk to work. Well, congratulations again, Gary, on This Destination, the new album, the new solo album. And who knows, like we've talked about in the last hour or so, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, so stay tuned.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Gary Kemp.
Only when you leave, I need to love you. And when the action has gone, I'm just a little fool enough to need you. But fool enough to long. Only when you leave in danger, I'll make sure that you pay. So give a little passion to a stranger. And take this all away.
Special thanks to Gary Kemp for joining us this week. Gary's new solo album, This Destination, is out now, and his great podcast with Guy Pratt, Rockonteurs, is approaching its 10th season and is a must-listen for anyone interested in hearing incredible conversations with their fellow musicians. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another episode of Rock and Roll High School.
Rock and Roll High School is a presentation of Pure Tone Music. Produced by Pete Ganbarg, with assistance from Craig Rosen, Ron Robinson, Stefan Accardo, Joe Palmerico, Zach Kornhauser, Ross Owen, Elena Luvis, Claire Hudson, Steve Leeds, and Rich Mahan. Please visit our website at rockschoolpodcast.com for past episodes and information on what's coming next. All rights reserved.